Kebangsaan Malaysia. But before we start our talk, let me give everyone some remind members of the floor about a few house rules. So the first one is please ensure your microphone is on mute until you are selected by a moderator to participate in a Q&A session. Secondly, if you have any question, please click on the icon raise your hand, which will alert the moderator that you would like to make a point. Please say your name and institution after the technical ICT has unmuted your microphone, or you can drop your question at the chat box. Please select lower hand once you have spoken. Your microphone will be muted. Please, if possible, please download the virtual background and set it as your background for the photography session like this. And aside from that, let me introduce to you our organizing party for today. So the UKM-YSD Chair for Sustainability is the main organizer for this talk today. And the chair aims to initiate direct participation of community and industry to tackle sustainability challenges based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the UN SDG. So UKM-YSD focus on 5 SDGs mainly: no poverty, quality education, industry innovation and infrastructure, responsible consumption and production, and finally climate change. The sustainability initiatives will be based on multidisciplinary and multi-organization approach representing the community, industry, government agencies, and the academia. The chair will also leverage on existing and new smart partnership with locals and international collaborations for its sustainability initiative. As for one of their close partnerships of UKM-YSD within UKM itself, it is with the Institute of Climate Change, or we identify as IPI. IPI is established on the 2nd of December 2013 with an aim to become an educational and research institution as well as a referral center for international reputation in the field of climate change and space science. Furthermore, we hope to be a medium of a repository and depository for data and monitoring for all matters related to climate change and climate around the region. So with that, today I'm proudly present you the Sustainability Talk series, which is initiated by UKM-YSD Chair for Sustainability, aimed to educate, discuss, and promote the exchange of ideas on current sustainability issues. The goal is to provide the foundation and framework by the experts in the subject through well thought out talks, and also create a platform for the dialogue, discussion via public lectures and forums, and contribute towards sustainable futures. So for the month of the World Water Day, 22nd March, which passed around 6 days ago, the awareness campaigns, it is our pleasure to invite Mr. Julian, the General Manager of 𝐕𝐶𝐺 Malaysia, to give us a speech. But before that, let me introduce the public who Mr. Julian 𝐻𝐼 is. So Mr. Julian is British, but he has been living overseas since 1992 and as a scientist by training with a degree in biochemistry. His career has covered management, technical and environmental consulting, including 6 years in Russia. He moved to KL in 1998 to head up an environmental consulting company before moving to Tioman to pursue his dream of running his own dive center, which he did for 6 years. It was during that time that he became interested in 𝐕𝐶𝐺, which he helped to set up in 2007 for the Malaysian chapter. 𝐕𝐶𝐺 Malaysia now conducts an annual national coral reef survey program at over 200 locations around Malaysia and has field offices in 5 sites, where it is working to encourage greater participation of local communities in marine resource management. So with that said, today I would like to present you Mr. Julian 𝐻𝐼 that will be presenting on the title of Moving Towards Participatory, Holistic and Sustainable Marine Resources Management in Malaysia. So Mr. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Wee. Apologies, my voice is a little bit strained this morning. I just tested for COVID a couple of days ago, so it's not quite back to normal yet. Thanks for the introduction. I'm trying to find there we go, there's the share screen button. Let me put this up. I'm assuming you can all see that now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, super. Come on. Technology, gotta love it. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to talk on this occasion. My name is Julian. I'm originally, well, I am British. I've been in Malaysia for nearly 25 years. And I've been working for 𝐸𝐶𝐥 for 15 of those years. It's a challenging job. It's very interesting. It's constantly changing. And it's something which I consider myself to have been very fortunate to have been able to get involved in. 𝐸𝐶𝐥 is both the name of the organization and the name of the coral reef survey methodology that we use. 𝐸𝐶𝐥 was established in 1996 and spread throughout the world over the next few years. It was established in Malaysia in 2007, as I've said. It is part of a worldwide network of 𝐸𝐶𝐥 coordinators. So there is a 𝐸𝐶𝐥 in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Taiwan, throughout Southeast Asia. There are around 90 𝐸𝐶𝐥s around the world. 𝐸𝐶𝐥 is the largest in Southeast Asia, and sorry, 𝐸𝐶𝐥 Malaysia is the largest in Southeast Asia, and possibly in the whole world, I think. Our mission, our vision is sustainably managed coral reefs in Malaysia. So we exist purely and simply to try and protect and conserve Malaysia's coral reefs, which are an extremely valuable and important economic resource. We currently have actually 20 people now. We are expanding somewhat at the moment. We have field offices in Pulau Tioman, in Pulau Redang, in the Mersing Islands, in Peninsular Malaysia. We also have a presence in Mantanani Island and Sempurna Island, and the Sempurna Islands in Sabah. So most of our staff are out in the field doing conservation work. You cannot do conservation from an office in KL. Just very brief introduction, then I'll get onto the topic. For those of you that don't know, coral reefs are an extremely valuable ecosystem, valuable both ecologically and economically. Why? Because they are a habitat for 33% of fish species. A lot of species actually live on coral reefs. Many others live part of their life cycle on coral reefs and then migrate elsewhere to become prey for other fish, for pelagic fish, for example. So they not only feed coastal populations that fish on coral reefs, they feed wider populations that feed on the pelagics that the reef fish themselves feed. In addition to fishing, they provide jobs in tourism. Think of the islands off the east coast that I just mentioned, for example, Tioman. The reason that most people go to Tioman or Redang or Perhentian is to go see the reefs, to either go snorkeling or diving. Tioman gets something over 250,000 visitors per year, pre-COVID. The whole of the East Coast Peninsula gets some 500,000 visitors a year. Let's assume that everybody travels there by bus and by boat, and they pay, you know, an average room rate of 60, 70, 80 ringgit a night, and, you know, add on the cost of diving services and snorkeling services. A quick back of the envelope calculation we did a few years ago told us that just that simple tourism industry on the islands is worth 500 million ringgit a year. And most of that is going to local businesses on the islands who are providing those services. So very important economically. And ecologically, as I said, they're a home, they're a habitat for a lot of fish species. They're a food source. And importantly, but not many people know, they protect something like 20% of the world's coastline from wave erosion. So as the waves approach the beach, they hit the reef and they slow down. The energy is removed, so it reduces wave erosion. What do? We arrange our programs around 4 things. The first is eco-action. So I mentioned earlier on, Reef Check is the name both of the organization and the coral reef method, the coral reef survey methodology. That gives us valuable information about what's happening with reefs. We have now 15 years of data on coral reefs and how they are changing. You see my video is going crazy again. I'll have to switch it up. The data gives us an idea of what's happening to reefs. So we go to the same place every year. We survey the same 100 meters of reef every year, and we can compare this year with the previous years, and we can see how things are changing. Changes in key indicators like the amount of live coral cover or the numbers of certain types of fish. And each of the indicators was chosen to tell us something about the health of coral reefs. So from the data, we can see what's happening. And ideally, and this is the subject of the talk really, we can see what's going wrong and we can address those changes. So holistic, participatory, sustainable coral reef management starts with good data. And that's what the Eco-Action program gives us. We also get involved in some science. We do a little bit of work on restoration. It's not a huge program for us, but we are trying to better understand some reef restoration processes, such as how coral reefs recover from bleaching. We're watching the mass spawning events every year. We've been monitoring that for several years now, and that's expected in the early in April at the first full moon after the spring equinox is when mass coral spawning usually happens. So we'll be monitoring that this year. In addition to science, we do work on advocacy, and advocacy covers a lot of things. It covers talking to government about policy. It covers talking to local communities about their participation in management. It covers management systems themselves and how we actually go about managing marine parks. Most of the islands off the east coast, the waters around the island are gazetted as marine parks. Similarly in Sabah and to a degree in Sarawak. But the approach to gazettement hasn't really changed in many years, and yet coral reef science has improved. So perhaps we should be rethinking our marine parks. And that's where we get onto the holistic part of my talk today. Finally, we do get involved in management to a degree. We're trying to find a way to work more effectively with local stakeholders. In 2020, the Department of Fisheries in Peninsular Malaysia introduced a new program called Reef Care, which gives local communities at least some participation in management. So we're working on that to strengthen it and improve local communities' participation and their opportunities for participation. And finally, we align with the various of the UN development goals, not just life below water, which is what a lot of people think, but if you think about what we do a lot of work on education, and we try to improve education, particularly for people living on the islands. Tierman has a school, Redang has a school, Pentin has a school, and we work with these schools to talk to the kids about conservation. Gender equality, decent work, sustainable communities, responsible consumption. These are all things that our work touch on. So we're not just about life underwater. So back to the topic. Moving towards participatory, holistic, sustainable marine resource management in Malaysia. It's quite a mouthful. So I thought I would break it down and think about what each of the different parts of it mean. So we have participatory, we have holistic, we have sustainable, we have marine resources, and we have management. Each of these things is important in and of itself. If we want to look at participatory management, what do we mean? We mean ensuring that local stakeholders, essentially we're talking about local communities on the islands here, who are living in protected areas, have a role in management and decision making. And this is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the Convention on Biodiversity's recent treaty signed in Montreal at the end of last year, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which for the first time puts IPLCs, or Indigenous people and local communities, front and center in conservation issues. Malaysia's own national policy on biological diversity includes many statements that support the fact that stakeholders should be consulted. They should have free, prior and informed consent on decisions affecting their livelihoods. I mentioned just now how we need to look at how we actually go about doing marine resource management. When the marine parks were initially established in 1994, there was no consultation. There was no discussion with locals on how this will affect their lives, their livelihoods, and so on. Government went ahead and did it. It's fine. It's what government does. At least that's what government used to do in those days. I think the world has moved on a little bit, and I think we need to be a bit more aware of the needs of stakeholders. So the first part of what we do is making sure that stakeholders are consulted, making sure they're aware. And much of the work that we're doing, for example, the DOF Reef Care Program that was introduced just before COVID, that is focusing specifically on getting local communities involved in management. I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. What do we mean by holistic? The marine parks, as they exist at the moment, largely focus on coral reefs. They were established as a spillover fishery device, which means that you set aside an area, the number of fish grows, and then once there's so many fish in the area, they start to spill over into other areas that can be fished. That was the principal reason for establishing them initially. But the marine parks are not just about coral reefs. There are other ecosystems involved, such as coastal mangroves, seagrass beds. These are linked ecosystems, ecologically linked, and it's important to protect all three collectively rather than just looking at coral reefs. It's also important to look at not just a single user, because the coral reefs in the marine parks are largely visited by tourists, but what about other stakeholders, tourism operators, shipping industry, sand mining industry? All of these things have an impact on these various marine ecosystems that we're talking about. And so holistic management means looking at the different ecosystems. It means looking at different stakeholders, trying to mix all of these needs, all of their needs together and see how they can all be managed. Sustainable. I'm sure many of us have read the standard description of sustainability from Brundtland, which, to paraphrase, I would say is meeting the needs of society today without compromising the needs of society tomorrow, basically not messing things up. So not over-harvesting, not overusing, not over-impacting, but making sure that the way that we use the ecosystems today doesn't compromise their provision of ecosystem services in the future. Marine resources, this is the easy one. Coral reefs, seagrasses and mangroves, like I said, they're ecologically linked. So some species, lobster, for example, some lobster will release eggs when they're in the mature stage. They're living on the coral reef, they will release eggs. The eggs migrate back to a coastal mangrove and they stay there for a while to start to mature. Once they've matured a little bit, they'll move to a seagrass bed nearby where they will continue to mature into juveniles. And once they reach a certain stage, they will move back to the coral reef where they mature further into adults. And then the whole process starts again. If you destroy any one of those three ecosystems, the mangroves or the seagrass beds, or indeed the coral reefs, you are basically interrupting with the life cycle of that species, and it's gone. So, you know, if you take away the mangroves, the eggs have nowhere to start to mature, and so they will fail. You lose your mangrove, your lobster population. And so it is with numerous species. Seagrass beds particularly are an important maturing ground for fishes, which become important fish catch for particularly coastal communities. So if we destroy the coastal mangroves and seagrass beds, we're destroying the very ecosystem that generates food for coastal communities. not a great idea. Finally, management, I guess mainly we're talking about then making sure that all of the rest is in place. So management, by management, people find it difficult to understand how do you manage a coral reef. So I try to use a terrestrial equivalent. How do you manage a coral reef? Same as you would a garden. If you're a gardener, then you've got to water the plants, you've got to put fertilizer on the plants and feed them, you've got to weed them and keep out the bad stuff, you've got to take out the trash that people throw away. That is managing an ecosystem, same as you can manage a coral reef. So if you imagine a coral reef on a popular tourist island, the likely impacts are snorkelers and divers kicking the reef, standing on the reef, boatmen throwing anchors on the reef. You've got pollution from oil, you've got trash thrown out of boats and from the mainland, you've got sewage treatment from the, or lack of sewage treatment, sewage pollution from the island. All of these different things can be managed, all these different impacts can be managed so that the ecosystem remains healthy and continues to provide ecosystem services by minimizing or eliminating these local threats. So that's where we're up to: participatory, holistic, sustainable marine resource management. So how are we doing? Well, I guess if I was to, an overall report card would read, could do better. I'm going to look at the first three in a bit more detail: participatory, holistic, sustainable. Sustainable marine resources is fairly straightforward. We talked about those ecosystems, and I'm not going to go into the biology of those, but we can if you wish. Management is, I think we understand that. We need to look at the type of management, but let's look at the three key ones there. Participatory management, where are we now? The marine parks are managed entirely by the Department of Fisheries. Not a bad thing, somebody has to be in charge. But it means that local stakeholders to date have not been involved in decisions on resource management, not in a formal way. So government can take a decision in the remoteness of Putrajaya without really thinking about the impact it can have on people's lives. New resort development, infrastructure development, restrictions in fishing. These are all good theoretical parts of a model for protecting marine parks, but what's the implications for the local community? And if the local community doesn't have any say, if there are no consultations on their views on decisions that affect management, then you are likely as not to end up in a conflict situation. We're doing some work at the moment looking at the gazettement of a small island off the east coast. And we are doing a full consultation process to make sure that the local people understand what is happening, what is being done. But more importantly, so that we can understand what their needs are and how we can try and design this protected area in such a way it minimizes the impact on the locals. That is what we would think we should be doing more of. But at the moment, those consultations are not happening in a big way. Where do we want to be? We would like to see stakeholders have a meaningful role in decision making. So when I say meaningful, I don't mean that we just go along and say to them once every 6 months, once every year, hi guys, everything's okay, you know, the marine park's working and things are good. But that's not a meaningful role. That's a message receiving role. Meaningful role would mean, for example, there would be an institution to respect all stakeholders, that there would be a way that stakeholders, a formal way that stakeholders would be consulted periodically. Their views would be sought and feedback would be sought from them on proposed changes. So that they, when the government says we want to do this, the locals have a chance to say, actually, no, we don't want that. And then you can have a conversation about whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing, but at least they have a choice to make an input. We would like to see all ecosystems being managed together, both within the protected area, but also between protected areas. I'll come back and describe this a little bit later on. But a model of how these areas could be managed would involve networking the islands together with lots and lots of little no-take zones scattered around the east coast, but nobody's looking at how they're connected to each other and how they're connected to the other ecosystems. So we need to look at that management holistically, but I'll come back to that. Participatory could mean green list recognized. Green list is the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Green list is their recognized standard for management. And if you are green list certified, it shows that you are managing your protected area as well. We're actually in the process of getting Tirman Island ready for green list accreditation. So hopefully we'll soon be able to say that yes, Tirman is actually managed up to international standards, which means stakeholders will have a role, that there will be an institution, that there will be public documentation, that there will be a complaints process, and so on, many, many parts to the system. But it all means that there is meaningful recognition of their participation. So how do we get there? I think, as I said, we need to reimagine what we mean by management. And we need to think about what is it we're managing? How are we managing it? Who are we managing it for? What are our goals here? Is it just simply a spillover fishery, or do we want it to be more than that, where we're looking at a seascape level management? The islands are connected to each other. How do we get there? We also need to get a wider range of stakeholders involved. So at the moment, most decisions are made at federal level, but I think there's an important role for state governments to play, because they have ownership over land. So at the moment, the island is not managed by marine parks. The island is managed by state, because the state land is a state issue. The marine park is just the donut of water around the island, which is managed by the federal government. So you have the state government responsible for the island and the federal government responsible for the water. Well, maybe they should be talking together more. And I don't think they are talking together enough. So that's participatory. What about holistic? As I mentioned earlier on, the marine parks were established initially to create a spillover fishery. The focus is mainly on managing coral reefs as the primary habitat for, at least for coral reef fish. So there's a weakness, it's too focused on a single issue. Also, the individual marine parks are managed independently of the other marine resources. So just for example, in Johor State, the island of Cebu has some important, very important seagrass meadows included. There are some very important seagrass meadows around Cebu Island. Some of the seagrass meadows are inside the marine park and therefore protected by marine park status, but the meadow goes outside of the marine park. Ecosystems don't think in terms of 2 nautical mile distances. So the meadow carries on outside the marine park, and that part of the seagrass meadow, and it's all one big seagrass meadow, it's not 2 separate seagrass meadows, it's one big seagrass meadow. That part of the seagrass meadow that is outside of the marine park has no protected status. So you have some of the seagrass meadow is protected, some is not protected. How does that make sense? Shouldn't we be looking at managing ecosystems more holistically? And also, there's not a lot of coordination between users and ecosystems. So how do fisheries interact with tourism, interact with transportation, interact with sand mining, interact with coastal development, and so on? So there's a kind of some silo thinking. People are thinking, I just do this bit, I just do this bit, I just do this bit. We perhaps need to get people thinking together so that tourism can work together with marine parks, can work together with fisheries department, can work together with oil and gas transportation, and so on and so forth. That's where we really want to be. We want to be looking at a broader scale management that looks into the nature of the individual islands as what are called no-take zones, but what is the connectivity between them? Can we manage the whole of the area, not just the MPAs, but the gaps between them from the coastline outwards, so that we look at mangrove management related to seagrass management, related to coral reef management from the west coast outwards, from the east coast outwards. And the same going from south to north, is there connectivity there that we can manage as well? That's where we need to be looking at broader scale management. And how do we get there? I think we need better maps of where our ecosystems are. We know what we know, and we know what we don't know. And what we don't know is where's the rest of it, because the reefs around the islands are well known, well mapped, but there are a lot of unsurveyed reef. There are a lot of unsurveyed areas which we are fairly sure have coral reefs. off of the coast of Kuantan, for example, the maritime charts show a lot of shoals, shallow areas, 5, 6, 7 meters, where you can be pretty confident there will be some coral reefs there. You know, there are coral reefs off of the islands 20 nautical miles away. Why would there not be coral reefs in shallow areas just 5 nautical miles away? And so I think we need to go and look at these areas, see what is there, because if there are coral reefs there, they're not protected, they're not managed. Who's looking after those? How are they important in connectivity between the islands? What about the connectivity from the mangroves outwards? Who's looking after that? So we need to have better ecosystems. We don't know where all our seagrass meadows are. The last survey of seagrass meadows is over 20 years old. So we've got a lot of mapping to do, both of ecosystems and stakeholders. Who's using them? Again, east of Kuantan, we know that there are some fishermen using the area. We know from fish light sources. These are sources that track fishing activity at night by tracking the lights. We know there's a lot of fishing activity off the east coast of Kuantan at night, but we don't know exactly where. We don't know exactly where they're fishing. Possibly coral reefs, possibly not. We need to go have a look, see if there's something there that needs to be protected. I think we also need to see a more integrated management structure. So you've got federal involvement, you've got state responsibilities, you've got local responsibilities. Instead of federal government trying to do everything at these different levels, I think maybe we can rearrange management and make it more locally relevant. And finally, let's look at sustainable. I don't want to talk about the definitions of sustainability here. Let's think in terms of sustainable marine resource management. If you go to the islands, you will find that there is no real control over visitor numbers. I'll give you an example from East Malaysia. We started working in Pulau Mantanani about 11, 12 years ago. Mantanani is a small island off the west coast of Sabah. It's about a couple of hours north of Kota Kinabalu. And when we started working there was something like 50 visitors per day. Day trippers going out to spend the day snorkeling and enjoying the beach. Pre-COVID, that number had grown from 50 a day to 3,000 a day, which is not, in my opinion, is not sustainable. But nobody was in control. You rent a piece of beach land from one of the local islanders. It's not entirely legal because that land is state land. You set up a sailcloth, you put some tables and chairs, and hey presto, you're a tourism operator. You get a boat and a van, you pick people up in KK, you drive them up the coastline to Kota Blood, and you put them on a boat and move into the island. You're a tourism operator, and nobody's controlling that. So numbers became unsustainable. But that's the difference between the protection agencies and the tourism agencies. So Ministry of Tourism wants to bring lots of tourists to Malaysia, and that's understandable in terms of national development, economic development. But is it a sensible thing in terms of the impact on ecosystems and, importantly, the impact on communities? I was surprised at when I met people on the islands after a couple of years of COVID, no business for 2 years, no tourists, no business. I was expecting everybody to be despondent, but actually they were quite happy. Why? Because they get their island back. 2 years of no tourists. They were doing the things that tourists do. They were doing the island hopping trips. They were spending time back out in nature. They were enjoying the environment they lived in. Yeah, okay, things were tough. They didn't have money. Incomes were restricted, but at least they had their home back. And so I think we need to think in terms of the sustainability of tourism. Are we having too many people? Are we valuing nature? What about individual projects like the Tirman Airport? Why are we having an airport in Tirman? There's an airport there already. Well, it's too small for jets. Yeah, but do we really need that? How should we be treating Tirman in terms of a biological resource? Should we be just trying to turn it into another Langkawi, or should we be saying it's an important biological resource, we will develop tourism, but it must be small scale? And hey, while we're at it, let's make it upmarket so that we increase the value of tourism. So I think we're not putting sufficient value on nature's services, which we do rely on for our livelihoods, for our food, for clean water, for oxygen. So basically, they're our life support system. Where do we want to be with sustainability? I think we should be looking at including the value of nature in decision making. I think people should be able to say, no, we don't want to do that development. Local communities on the islands faced with the development, a new resort, a new airport, new infrastructure, whatever it is, should be sufficiently well informed about what's happening on their island to be able to say, no, we don't want that. That is a step too far. I could go into detail about various developments on various islands, but often a development is promoted as good for the island and good for jobs and good for tourism, whereas it isn't really. If I think of 𝐶IEMN now, the developments which are being proposed, there is pretty much full employment on 𝐶IEMN now. Anybody that wants a job's got one, and most of them are employed in tourism. So building more resorts, building more infrastructure, bringing more tourists, why does that benefit the locals? They've all got jobs. All it does is put more stress on the nature, on the communities, on the infrastructure. We have to build more. When we build more, we create more damage to the ecosystems. So we need to look at how we are valuing those ecosystem services. What are they? Are they quantified? Do we understand how valuable they are? Are we respecting those values? And we should be saying no to further development. Again, to get there, I think local stakeholder participation is important. We need to better understand ecosystem services and their financial values, and we need to talk to stakeholders about looking long-term rather than short-term. Just a couple more slides. This is, so it's a bit blurry, but this is basically the marine parks off of the east coast here. So 𝐵𝐼𝐻 Islands down in the south, 𝐶IEMN in Pahang. We've got Tenggol in Terengganu, and we've got Perhentian and Redang. The labels are the wrong way around. But these are little individual no-take zones separated by either a few kilometers or tens or even hundreds of kilometers. That's where we are now with our MPAs in Peninsular Malaysia. And this picture is the same on the west coast. There's a couple of little MPAs on the west coast. It's not dissimilar in Sabah and Sarawak, although Sabah and Sarawak do tend to go for larger MPAs. But if we look at that situation there, we're looking at those islands in isolation. Now we know that there is biological connectivity from the southern islands to the northern islands. Genetic studies have shown this. So there has to be connections between the southern islands and the northern islands somehow. But we also know that coral larvae, when they are released, do not move very far. They do, for example, they do not travel far enough to get from 𝐶IEMN Island to Tenggol Island. So scientists are suggesting that there are some reefs in between where the larvae move to, and they settle, and they start to grow, and they mature, and they start to reproduce, and then they spawn again, and the coral larvae move further northwards, and so on and so on. And these stepping stones are basically the unsurveyed reefs we're talking about, for example, off Kuantan. If we're not looking after those areas, then this connectivity is lost. I don't have a slide to demonstrate it, but we have similar connectivity from the coast going outwards, so west to east connectivity, from the coastal mangroves to seagrass beds to coral reefs. Let's look at the 𝐵𝐼𝐻 Islands down in the south here. We know that there are mangroves along the coastline in just north of 𝐵𝐻 from Rompin to Penyabong. We know there are mangrove and seagrass beds at Pulau Setindan in 𝐵𝐻 and down in Sedili. So up and down this area of coastline, there is quite a lot of biological activity on the coastline. And we've got the islands off the coast as well. So there is connectivity between the coastline and the islands. So there is what I call west to east connectivity. And yet, all we're doing is we're drawing a 2 nautical mile boundary around the islands, and we're just protecting that bit. What about the ocean in between and the ecosystems that in that ocean? How are we protecting all of that important biological that important habitat? So we've got north-south, we've got south-north, and we've got west-east connectivity. What are we doing to protect that? Well, we think we should be looking at wide area management, such as this. We should be looking at managing the whole of that area so that we are looking at not just the no-take zones that are the islands, but the coastal mangrove systems, the seagrass meadows, the corridors between the marine parks where there are these important stepping stones. We think that management should be participatory so that the people on the islands, but also on the mainland, have a say in what's happening with the way that resources are developed. Because looking at coastal areas, there are usually local communities involved where coastline is being developed. There are users of that coastline. So we've got fishermen, for example, in Malacca who are suffering because of the ecosystem damage caused by the development of the Malacca Gateway. And that's some research that was done recently, just one example. It should be holistic so that we're looking at the connectivity between different ecosystems and also between the islands in the south and islands in the north. It also looks at other users. So holistic management looks at protecting the islands and the coastal ecosystem, but it looks at how do we manage the fisheries as well. This area that I'm showing here contains a lot of fisheries, coastal fisheries and the deeper sea fisheries are both. So local artisanal fishing and trawl fishing goes further out. Management should be sustainable so that all stakeholders have a say, so that everybody understands that we should not be over utilizing these resources. If you are just looking at individual islands, then you're not looking sustainable. But if you're looking at long term, you're looking at not overutilizing the islands, the coastal ecosystems, the deeper water fisheries, then you are looking at managing sustainably. Again, marine resources, we're looking not just at the coral reefs around the islands, but at the mangroves and the seagrass beds, and yes, the mudflats and the estuarine ecosystems. I'm just picking on the mainlands. And finally, management. What I see before me looks a little bit like the Great Barrier Reef Marine Protected Area off the coast of Australia. It's 1,000+ kilometers long. There are community-based management organizations, committees in, I think, 11 towns up and down the coastline, which are the local eyes and ears of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. And they are the channel for providing feedback to the management agency on the impact of its measures, the impact of management, how things are changing, how things are improving or not improving, what's going right with the reef, what's going wrong with the reef. So there is a management agency, there is a local level participation, and people on the ground have a say in how the reef is managed. That really is all I wanted to say this morning. Excuse my coughing and snuffling. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'll stop sharing. I can always come back to it if anybody wants to refer to any of the slides. And by the way, we're more than welcome to have copies of the presentation deck. I'm happy to share that. Dr. Wee.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Julian. Thank you very much for spending your time, even though you are not feeling well today. So, I see some, we do really have some questions for you, but not in the chat, but it's with me right now. So one of the question is from Mr. Muhammad Izzuddin Anwar. He's asking how far does a remote sensing technology can benefit in the sense of monitoring and also surveying the coral reef areas, especially as the region that you spoke from your last slide. What is the way forward in this next 3 to 5 years when in regards to this remote sensing technology?
Interesting question. Yeah, we have been approached probably once a year for the last 15 years by a team trying to suggest to us that they've got the solution to our problems, that we don't need to go diving anymore. We have a remote sensing technology available to do all your surveys for you. I have yet to see such a technology. I've yet to see an approach that actually really works. I'm skeptical that a satellite can tell what a structure underwater is, 10, 15 meters underwater. Is it coral? Is it rock? Is it alive? What sort of coral is it? But I think we're getting better. I think the satellite technology is getting better. The resolution is getting better. Our understanding of how to interpret the data is getting better. So I think like right now, today, the role of remote sensing is very limited. But I think it's going to be huge in the next 5 to 10 years. And yes, for large areas that we're talking about, that area I showed you is a very large area. Our divers cover 100 meters distance, and we do 200 sites a year. That is a small fraction of the area that I showed you in that graph, in that slide. So I think remote sensing is going to be important. It's going to need a lot of ground truthing before cynical old people like me will be convinced that it works. But yeah, I think it definitely has a role in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. So how following up with that question, is there any SOP which helps in like using the remote sensing of the satellite image as the rough, quick and dirty methods to like cover detecting the reef area in a very quick manner, and then only manually going down one by one to check the areas?
Not really. Remote sensing is used for mangroves. The 𝐕RIM did a publication back in 2020 looking at mangroves in Malaysia, and mapping can be used for terrestrial ecosystems much more easily. But for coral reefs, I don't think anybody is showing us anything much more than there are structures there. Well, we know that already. I mean, you can find that from Google Earth. You know, if you look around an island, you can find where the water shallow, where it deepens away to depths too great for satellites to be able to see, and you can see that there are structures within that shallower water. But that really isn't a lot of use, because those structures, like I said, it could be rock, it could be dead coral, it could be live coral, it could be something else. So right now, I don't think there are any useful protocols, but yeah, watch this space. I think there are people who are looking at using satellite data and looking at ways to ground truth it. One example is the Allen Coral Atlas. That was based largely on remote sensing and then local ground truthing. So that is one example. And I know that the people that run the Allen Coral Atlas recognize that there are improvements needed, but that's a good example of what has been done. But there's an awful lot more work needs to be done, and that itself is backed up by published studies as well. So it's not just satellites and ground truthing. There's a lot of more data involved in that.
Thank you very much for your answering the questions. So moving to the public awareness program. So when you mentioned about 𝐷𝐿FIN initiative about responsible diving just now. So is there any initiative or any way that we can incorporate the 𝐷𝐿FIN into a standard diving license? Like the open water, like before, because we have more and more new divers coming in, right? We have more and more open water or advanced divers. So is there any plan or any initiative to incorporate the 𝐷𝐿FIN responsible diving educational public awareness module into the open water module?
Funny you should ask. The managers of 𝐷𝐿FIN was okay. So with 𝐷𝐿FIN's, Reef Check Malaysia is the Malaysian coordinator. So we run the program on a local basis, which means that we go out and do the assessments of individual dive centers who wish to be members, and we help them to understand how the system works, and we help them to arrange things so that the idea behind 𝐷𝐿FINs is that it reduces the impact of diving operations. Just for example, by not using boat anchors, by managing trash, by managing divers well underwater, doing good briefing, so very simple stuff. So we're the coordinator. The program is actually managed by an organization called Reef World, who are appointed by the United Nations to manage the program. So the program organizers last year made an agreement with PADI, which is one of the main dive certification organizations, to work together to improve dive education on conservation issues and to improve dive center performance. And it is my understanding that sometime soon, PADI will launch a new dive center, what do they call it, accreditation, which includes green fins. So PADI is encouraging its members to adopt green fins as a tool for improving environmental performance. And so a green fins dive center, a PADI green fins dive center, will be required to take certain steps to improve diver education, to ensure that damage to the environment is minimized. So I think what you're talking about, Dr. Hui, is happening now. It's not complete yet, but it's in the process of happening.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. So we have a question from the chat box by Tuan Noraida, Madam Tuan Noraida, if I'm not mistaken. So how does marine litter impact the coral reefs, and what is the current platform used by local stakeholders in voicing out the recommendation to the government? So how do we translate record marine litters incidents, and also how we translate those records up to the level?
Marine litter can have numerous impacts on coral reefs. So there's the simple example would be entanglement. Fishing nets are a big part of marine litter, which many people don't know about. Fishing nets, fishing gear, they can get entangled on coral reefs and they can physically damage the reef. So if you imagine a fishing net is caught on the reef and the currents are pulling the net, then that can damage the reef itself. You also get marine life get tangled up in the net or in the fishing gear, so that can kill turtles and sharks and so on. Our guys, particularly on Tirman and other places where we work with local communities, one of the things that they spend some time doing is removing ghost nets from the reefs. And the number of times that they find dead stuff in the nets is rather depressing. So there's that physical damage. There is some research to suggest that plastics that get stuck in the reef can actually cause disease, or can make disease affect the reef more easily. Some of the chemicals in plastics that leach out can help to advance disease in corals. So there's physical impacts, there's chemical impacts, there's just even small plastic bags. This is very frustrating. Those small little pink plastic bags that you walk out in the supermarket and you've got your little plastic bottle of water in a plastic bag. Why? You throw the plastic bag away because it's too small to be of any use, and guess what? It ends up wrapped around a piece of coral, and you unwrap it from the coral and you can see underneath the coral is bleached, where the coral has died because it's been cut off from sunlight. Can we stop using those plastic bags, please, guys? Because there is a huge impact there. In terms of stakeholders voicing out recommendations to the government, I'm afraid not much. This is something that hasn't yet. It's one area where we haven't joined the dots yet, because government in Malaysia takes responsibility for everything. We know what we're doing. Do as you're told. Leave things alone. So local stakeholders don't have a lot of scope to raise their voice about things, as I was talking about earlier on. We have a thing called International Coastal Cleanup, which we run once a year, third week of September. It's run by the Ocean Conservancy out of the US. It's been going for 40 years or so. And we get lots and lots of people around Malaysia to at least go out on the beaches and do beach cleanups. Some people do underwater cleanups as well. Now, we publish that data, we promote the event, and we try to use it as a way to encourage people to think about waste management, about marine debris. But there are not many channels by which people can make their thoughts known. There are a few other NGOs like Trash Hero. They do some beach cleanups. There's Clean Up the World. That's another group that does it. But we're not getting a lot of information up there about marine litter and its impact. I mean, Pulau Mantanani, we run the waste management system because nobody else is doing it. It's a tourism island, and yet there's trash all over the place. Ministry of Tourism wants to bring more people to this island, but there's trash all over the place. That's the job of Municipal Council, not Ministry of Tourism. So Ministry of Tourism is still bringing the tourists. Municipal Council is not doing its job. Who's in charge here? We need to join up these different decision makers and make them all realize that they need to be working together more. And marine debris is one issue on that.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this. I think we also need to have a huge, do you think that we need to have a huge big reports about the current Malaysia's marine litter to be made public so that everyone are aware of it? And even, I mean, it will penetrate through the higher ups later.
I have to say, if we are still at the stage of producing reports with data to persuade government something needs to be done, then what the hell have we been doing for the last 20 years?
Right.
Just go to a beach near you and you will see, go to a river near you and you will see trash all over the place. Walk down the street near you, you will see, the problem is visible, it's obvious, it's there. Why isn't something being done? I don't know. We've been looking at the issue of marine debris for several years. I remember going to Pulau Mantanani back in about 2017, and I walked onto the beach once again. It was covered in plastic bottles once again, and I was like, what are we going to do? So I returned to KL. We wrote to 10 large corporations who are big plastics users. 3 of them responded. One of them said no thanks, one of them said maybe, and one of them said come talk to us. So that was Coca-Cola. So we went and talked to them. We've been working with their foundation ever since, looking at waste management issues. And it's a complex problem, obviously, but some of the solutions are known. For example, the segregating waste at source. There's a law active in some states that says householders have to segregate their waste. Who's doing it? Not many people. Well, why are we not enforcing that law? Well, because we don't want to make it. So, you know, the law's there, it's just not being enforced. So I don't think we need lots more big reports. Or maybe that's the only way we'll ever get the government to listen. So it's a tricky question, Dr. Wee. We should not need any more reports like that. We should not need any more data. It's there, and yet still nothing's happening.
All right. Thank you very much for your input on that. So let's move back slightly closer to where you started. Something that you started about. It's about the artificial reef and the effectiveness by Mr. Nasir, if I'm not mistaken. Would you mind sharing your opinion on effectiveness on artificial reefs and initiative to increase the population of coral reefs?
Sure. We don't have time to get involved in a full discussion about what an artificial reef is. But let me put it this way. Putting a structure into the water as a way to recreate the coral reef is not, in my opinion, the best way to go with improving the status of our coral reefs. Just let me go very briefly to the data. We've been doing surveys for 15 years. The surveys showed that between about 2015 and 2019, there was a slow, gradual decline in coral reef health across Malaysia, right? Maybe 1 percentage point a year. So year on year, it doesn't make a lot of difference. But after 5 years, 5 percentage points is a big change. So there is a problem with the declining health of coral reefs in Malaysia. It's not a 100% healthy situation. What's interesting is that during COVID time, it improved. So from 2019 to 2020 to 2022, the data from those 3 years shows a small increase in the health of coral reefs. Why would that be? Because there were no tourists standing all over them and trampling on them and diving on them, and no trash and less pollution from sewage and so on. So we can say that if we leave our reefs alone, they will regenerate themselves naturally. So your question, Nasir, is why are we putting artificial structures in the water? Why are we not just leaving coral reefs alone to recover for themselves? Now, 2 things. One is, if you are putting artificial structures in the water, know what the reason is. And one reason is to create fish aggregating devices to bring fish together to improve fishing effort. These are widely used in a very traditional sense by the island communities. I used to know the name of them. I can't remember now. But basically, it's a rock, a rope, some palm fronds, and you throw it in the water, and the fish gather underneath the palm fronds, and the little boat comes along, 1 man, 1 line, 1 hook, and pulls a few fish out from underneath this fish aggregating device. There are larger structures as well, but these are not. I don't think we should be calling these artificial reefs. They are artificial structures, yes. But is their job to create reef? I don't think it is. So when we think about reef restoration, we look at how we can take a bit of reef that's been damaged and restore it to its original condition. And to do that, we may or may not use structures depending on the remaining substrate. Has it been completely blown apart by fish bombing, happens in Sabah? If it has, then you may need some structures. But when we're looking at reef restoration area that's been damaged, trying to encourage recovery of that small area so that we are reconnecting two areas of reef that have been separated from each other. So it's a tricky area terminology-wise. Let's think very carefully about what we're doing. Our work on coral restoration has been very small scale. Deliberately so, because we're not trying to fix big areas of reef. You can't do that. It's like trying to fix a rainforest that's been cut down for plantation. It has to happen naturally over a long period of time. We would rather work on trying to reduce the impacts so that we're not damaging the reef in the first place. So training the dive centers, as Dr. Wee just said, training snorkeling guide operators, training improving the sewage management and treatment on the islands. All of these things can help to reduce the impacts to the reefs in the first place, so you avoid the damage. You don't even do the damage so that you need to fix it.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Julian. So with regards to the management part of the reef, which one do you think it's more efficient, whereby you have one single, we call it the mother reef. That means an important reef that supply like the larvae or the connectivity, the main stock connectivity reef, and then just control visitors from visiting those reef, and then let them visit the rest of the reef, or make like a circular, like a music chair, like you conserve one this year and then you move to the next one next year, or move to the other one the other year.
I think what you're describing what I would call resilience. Resilient reefs. So some areas of reef, we know there are objective studies you can do to say this reef area is what we call resilient, and those areas we need to protect quite very diligently because they're important for supplying larvae to damaged areas. They are the healthiest reefs, as it were. So if other areas get damaged, these areas are going to be supplying coral larvae to those damaged areas.
Yes.
So we need to protect those areas. Secondly, I think our evidence, the data that we've collected during the COVID period to show that reefs recover when they're left alone suggests to me that we should be saying, okay, let's close this area of reef for a year, and then let's close that area of reef for a year, and then that area, and move around, as you said, and say, this is what farmers used to do back in the olden times, hundreds of years ago. They would keep one area of field, they would keep it fallow. They would not use it. They would let it naturally regenerate with natural vegetation, local vegetation, and that would help the soil to recover, and so on. And then they would put it back into productivity, but they'd leave it for a while. And we now have evidence for over 3 years to say that reefs that are left alone seem to improve. Now, here's where you bring in local stakeholder consultation. How would the diving industry like it if we go to Tirman and say, right, we're going to close half of the reefs? Well, the diving industry wouldn't like it, or the snorkeling industry, the tourism industry wouldn't like it. So let's enter into a conversation. Can we close half of this reef? Can we close part of that reef? Can we close all of this reef for a while? So enter into a negotiation with people and say, well, yes, we understand we need to close some areas, but let's do it in such a way that we still allow some economic life to continue. Otherwise, you're killing people's businesses. I believe that's possible, and I think we should be looking to try and do it. In fact, that's something that we are really, really thinking hard about at the moment, to get people to understand the idea that reefs need to be closed down, or closing them down for a while helps them to recover and makes them a better reef, and therefore a better tourism product. More fish.
I believe some reefs do really need their me time.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
So we follow up with another question. I think it's from Miss Azmi from Narim. but I'm not very sure how to ask me from Nari. Can you please ask your question?
It's okay.
Because
I know what I think I know what this is about.
yeah,
Asmi, I think you're talking about the problem with last year. Recently, some tourists have been taken ill while diving and snorkeling at the Perhentian Islands, and there are suggestions that it's seawater quality that is the problem. What is the actual problem? I think is sewage pollution from the resort operators on the islands or from the village on the islands. I'm not laying the blame on anybody. We all know that sewage pollution across the islands is not as good as it could be. And the data that we have show that there is some sewage pollution, or likely to be some sewage pollution in the water. We have some water quality data which supports this. And I think we need to recognize that we have a problem. If nothing else, it's making tourists sick, which is not a great idea. But more importantly, it is affecting the health of your ecosystems, and it needs to be addressed. So I think Perhentian is a good example of what can go wrong and what we really, really need to fix.
all right. Thank you very much for your comments about that incident. The next one will be, is deploying a marine, same person asked me from Narin, is deploying the marine renewable harvesting could profit of island community of Malaysia coastline and coastline erosion. I'm sorry, maybe we need some definition of marine renewable harvesting. Is there any definition for that terms?
I don't know if he's talking about renewable energy or, you know, renewable resource like seaweed. I'm a bit curious about that one. Renewable energy. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think there's quite a lot of different elements in your question there, Asmi, and that this is renewable energy is not my field. I'm a believer in renewable energy. I think we should have solar panels on every building in Malaysia, and I think there's an example of an installation in Perhentian where there's a windmill. There's a windmill and a solar installation up on the hill on Perhentian Kecil, but I don't think the power that they generate is utilized. I don't think they're connected to anything. So I think there are opportunities. RE absorbing hydraulics energy from seas. Oh wow! Okay, that is high level marine engineering. I'm not going to go anywhere near that one, I'm afraid, Asmi. I don't know whether or not there are big enough ocean flows. The only thing I know about marine renewable energy is in places like the islands of Scotland, where there are deep narrow channels between islands with massive tidal flows between them. Honestly, I think the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia is a flat sandy bottom at 50 meters for 50 meters depth for most of it, and I don't know whether or not the currents are strong enough to generate sufficient amounts of reliable renewables. I think for Malaysia, with its sunny climate, we should be focusing on solar renewables. Like I said, not my field, I'm afraid. It would be nice if we could find some way to generate money for the islanders, but I don't know if marine renewables is one of them.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Junior, for your comments about the renewable energy. And one question I would like to, maybe 135 of us, the participants of this room, can benefit from this, is that based on your experience running Reef Check Malaysia, what else can a layman like John Doe or Jane Doe can help in your effort in protecting the reefs?
It's difficult. I think there's a couple of practical things you can do. One is when you go to an island, when you go to an area where there's coral reef, just be aware that the very fact that you're there, that you are there, is causing damage. You know, you have traveled there by some means of transport, which is probably involving a carbon-based fuel. So you have contributed to CO2 in the Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. We just suddenly had a technical issue. Sorry, I'm very sorry.
I think I just got thrown out. So be an aware consumer when you travel to areas with fragile ecosystems, not just coral reefs. You can be talking about terrestrial tourism as well. Just treat it with respect. Imagine you're in your own back garden. Don't throw litter. Don't stand on things you shouldn't stand on. Be aware of the impact that you're having. So that's I think that's the main thing that we can all do. We can all lobby for changing petrol-driven cars to electric cars, but we can't actually, many of us, really do much about that until we become consumers. Only consumers can make that decision. And yes, we can lobby government for it, but at the end of the day, that's a bigger economic argument. But if you are a tourist, you can very specifically decide not to stay in a resort that doesn't have that doesn't follow green practices. So on 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN Island, for example, we've vetted all of the resorts against green hotel criteria. So find one of the operators there that's green resort. Find an operator of the �W𝐨𝐻𝐻𝐵𝐻 Dive Centre. So you can help by using ethical, responsible operators. That's the biggest thing you can do. You can help with things like coastal cleanups. You can help with things like awareness programs. But from a personal basis, I think using your tourism dollar responsibly is a very important thing to do.
All right, thanks. So how about what is the main roadblocks or the biggest struggles you face as a reef check manager, or when it comes to your effort in conserving and protecting the reefs in Malaysia throughout your experience?
Let me use the phrase I've used a few times again. It's not joined up. So, for example, the work we've been doing in 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN for several years now supports the idea that local communities actually do want to get involved in reef management. Some people think, oh, the local islanders, they don't know what they're talking about. They're not educated. They don't really care. They just live there. It's not true. When you engage with them, they are interested. They do care, and they want to be involved. But the system as it is set up today simply doesn't allow them. I'm not saying it was deliberately done that way. I'm just saying the way it was done doesn't allow local community participation, or it hasn't until recently with the Department of Fisheries Reef Care Program, which is a fantastic program. We love it. So we're now in a position that local people can get involved, but there's no institution for them to get involved through. So yes, you can have a say, but who do you talk to? Who do you communicate with? So the institutional thing needs to be set up. So that's not joined up. And then we're looking at, look, we think there's enough tourists on 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN. We don't really want too much more development. And the ecosystems on the island and in the ocean are really under quite a lot of stress. So we don't want any more tourists. But Ministry of Tourism is like, bring lots of tourists. We want more tourists. So that's not joined up. And then state government wants to develop the island in certain ways, or state government doesn't want to spend money on infrastructure. That's not joined up. So I think the biggest challenge we face would be to get all of these stakeholders around the table and say, okay, let's take a picture of what 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN looks like. I use 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN as an example. What's the situation on 𝐶𝐸R𝑚AN, and what's going wrong, and what can we fix? And it would need all of those different people to participate in that discussion to reach a meaningful conclusion, one that could then be acted upon, because you would need to look at infrastructure, you'd need to look at fisheries, you'd need to look at number of tourists, you'd need to look at water waste management, you need to look at closed areas on the island as well as in the ocean, improving the tourism product, looking at more terrestrial tourism. So big conversation to have. You can only do that if everybody is able to talk, if everybody is empowered to talk. But if you've just got 2 or 3 government agencies talking to each other, you're not going to make any progress. So we need to see joined up management from top to bottom, across stakeholders, across ecosystems, across communities.
All right, thanks.
Simple as that.
Sure. So I have one final question from myself with regards to climate change, right? So the first thing is that the first question will be, is there any gradual effects or observation on climate change onto the coral reef in Malaysia? And the second question is, the meteorology department recently just announced that there will be a El Nino, the dry years coming soon. The El Nino, if I'm not mistaken. I always keep on confusing with those two terms. And is ReefCheck prepared for this coming hot weather? Yeah, these are the two questions.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. Our annual monitoring includes observations of coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is one of the main, one of the preliminary impacts from global climate change, from global warming. We see occasional bits of bleaching from when we're doing the surveys, but nothing major. Mass coral bleaching, which is the thing that really does the damage to coral reefs, first noticed in 1998, and then the second mass bleaching we had in Malaysia was 2010, and we have not had a big one since then. I've also read that this year is going to be a warm weather year, and we are waiting with trepidation, but I'll come back to that. So no, our data is not supporting necessarily climate related damage. Our data is showing a slow decline in coral reef health. And I would not want to try and be investigating that data, looking at that data to look for climate change impacts. I would be saying, what is the broad data telling us? We need to improve sewage treatment, we need to improve water quality, we need to reduce physical impacts. These are the things we can easily do something about, because quite frankly, there's nothing I can do about climate change. There's nothing I can do about warming oceans. That's going to happen. So what I would say is we need to build resilience, and we need to reduce the impact so the reefs are as healthy as they possibly can be to overcome the impacts of climate change. To this point, I usually use my analogy of the human body. Somebody who is well rested, somebody who has a good diet, takes good physical exercise, doesn't abuse themselves with drinking and so on, that person will shrug off COVID or a disease like COVID. And then there's me, obviously, who did not shrug off COVID. I'm obviously not very resilient. I don't get enough rest and too much stress and so on. So reefs are an organism just like we are. And if we leave them alone so that they are as healthy as possible, they will survive changing circumstances to a degree. So that's one part of it. What was the second part of the question? I can't remember.
So about the warming climate, warming year.
Okay. So yeah, we discovered back in 2010, when we were watching the last bleaching event unfold, there isn't actually much you can do once it starts. There's very, very limiting things you can do. When we saw what happened in 2010 and the lack of preparedness, we actually put together a bleaching response plan, which says basically, these are the steps to take when certain things happen. The biggest challenge was information. It was people were very confused. They didn't know what was going on. There was all sorts of misinformation flying around. So there was a communications plan aspect to it. We will be monitoring bleaching. We always do. When we have a plan to increase monitoring, there's, like I said, there's very little you can do other than maybe close some sites. So if you have a site that is bleached, the coral is stressed and it's weakened physiologically, maybe keeping divers away would be a good idea. Boats, similarly, snorkelers similarly, because they bring impacts with them. A boat brings pollution from the engine, oil pollution. Snorkelers bring bread, which they shouldn't, but they still do. And all of these things have negative effects on the reef. So if you know your resilient sites, which you mentioned earlier on, the sites that we absolutely must protect, maybe we need to think about closing off access to some of those while they are in this weakened state of bleaching. Because bleaching coral is not dead coral, not yet. It will be if things don't return to normal soon. But anything we can do to reduce the impacts on those reef areas, which are the important reef areas, is something that we should do. We tried this a little bit back in 2010. The government did eventually move to close some coral reef sites, but it was a patchy response, and people didn't understand what was going on. So the response was like, "Well, why are they doing that?" And it was a bit of a negative reaction. But hopefully, hopefully there won't be a bleaching event. But if there is, hopefully we're a bit better organized to respond to it. Again, not much we can do, but we do what we can.
Sure. We are actually very grateful with all your efforts so far and contributing to the conservation work in the coral reef of Malaysia. So before we end this, it's 10:22. Do you have any last word for all the participants who joined us this talk today?
I don't wish to sound negative, but the reality is that our ecosystems, not just marine ecosystems, but terrestrial ecosystems as well, there are pressures. There are impacts from growing populations, from climate change, from waste management. I mean, we've all seen pictures of the 5 gyres and the amount of plastic in the oceans. And we all look at government to do something. Well, I think we should start looking at ourselves as well. We are the ones causing the littering. We are the ones causing some of these problems. Not all of them. Some of them are beyond individuals, but we all have a role to play. And I think we all need to recognize that more and take it more seriously.
All right. So that wraps up for our talk today. But before we really end this, thank you very much, Mr. Julian Hyde, for your time and your talk today. And we wish to have a group photo. And for all the participants, please switch on your camera, and we will have a group photo with Mr. Julian.
Okay, ready? Internet lag. Dr. Wee?
Is that right?
Wait. Macam lag.
Oh, like it's okay. Yes.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Freestyle. 1, 2, 3.
All right. Okay. All right.
All right.
All right. With that said, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And if you have any questions with regarding to sustainability or climate change, please feel free to contact us at UKM-YSD or Institute of Climate Change UKM. With that said, I would like to give a round of applause to Mr. Julian Hyde. Thank you very much. And for all the participants, I hope to see you for our next sustainability talk. Have a great day and have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Wee.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Welcome.
Sekejap. Sekejap ya.